Charles de Gaulle was born on the 22nd of November, 1890 in the industrial city of Lille in northern France. He was the third among 5 children in a deeply Catholic and strongly patriotic household. His father, Henri de Gaulle, worked as a philosophy and literature school teacher and instilled in his children a passion for history along with a powerful sense of responsibility toward their country. His mother, Jean Mayo, came from a family involved in textile manufacturing. Together, his parents provided Charles with a strict yet loving upbringing rooted in discipline, faith, and tradition. From a very young age, de Gaulle showed a powerful fascination with French history. As a boy, he consumed books about historical wars, particularly the campaigns of Napoleon Bonaparte. He admired legendary military commanders and began imagining himself serving in uniform one day. Friends later remembered that even as a boy, he would often state with unusual seriousness that he was meant for greatness. In 1909, at 19 years old, de Gaulle entered the prestigious Saint-Cyr Military Academy, considered the French counterpart to Sandhurst or West Point. During his training, he built a reputation for being intelligent and determined, though also stubborn and fiercely independent in his thinking. His instructors noted his strong will and tendency to question widely accepted ideas. He graduated in 1912 and was commissioned into the French army, joining the 33rd Infantry Regiment. His commanding officer was Colonel Philippe Pétain, a man who would later play both a decisive and tragic role in de Gaulle's life. Under Pétain's command, the young officer learned core leadership and command principles, and his natural leadership ability was quickly noticed. When the First World War began in 1914, de Gaulle went to the front lines with his regiment. He immediately experienced the brutal realities of trench warfare. At the Battle of Dong, he suffered a leg wound. After a short recovery period, he returned to combat, determined to continue serving. He displayed bravery and calmness under fire, earning the respect of his soldiers. During the Battle of Verdun in March 1916, he commanded a company during desperate fighting at Duomo. There, he was wounded again, this time in both chest and thigh. Left unable to move on the battlefield, he was captured by German troops from Germany. Captivity proved extremely painful for de Gaulle. He spent the remainder of the war in German prisoner-of-war camps. Refusing to accept defeat, he attempted escape at least 5 times. Each time he was caught again, and eventually his captors began viewing him with both frustration and reluctant respect. He remained imprisoned until the armistice in November 1918. The war permanently shaped him. He endured defeat, capture, and the agony of watching his nation suffer heavy losses. Yet these experiences only strengthened his determination. He became convinced that France's survival required bold strategy and strong leadership. During the 1920s, de Gaulle began standing out not only as a soldier but also as a military thinker. He taught military history at the French Staff College, where his lectures and writings revealed a sharp analytical mind. He strongly supported mechanized warfare, arguing that tanks working alongside mobile infantry and aircraft could restore movement and flexibility to modern battlefields. However, these ideas were largely ignored by a French military still focused on trench-style defensive warfare. During this era, he published several works, including The Edge of the Sword in 1932, where he analyzed leadership qualities necessary for great commanders, and Toward a Professional Army in 1934, where he promoted the idea of smaller, elite mechanized forces. Although some were impressed by his thinking, most senior officers dismissed him as overly ambitious, arrogant, and ahead of his time. By the late 1930s, as Europe moved closer to another large-scale war, de Gaulle slowly rose through military ranks, though he never fully fit into the rigid military hierarchy. His independence and blunt speech often distanced him from colleagues. Still, his intellectual strength was undeniable. He became convinced that France would again face Germany in war and that the country was dangerously unprepared. On the eve of the Second World War, de Gaulle was still a colonel, relatively unknown and often considered eccentric, yet ready for opportunity. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, France declared war alongside Britain. De Gaulle was assigned command of the 57th Tank Regiment, finally allowing him to test his armored warfare theories. The following winter became known as the Phony War. While Germany crushed Poland, France and Britain remained mostly inactive behind defensive lines. De Gaulle grew frustrated, repeatedly urging adoption of aggressive mobile tactics, but French high command remained defensive. In May 1940, Germany launched its invasion of France, bypassing defensive lines and advancing rapidly through Belgium and the Ardennes region. French forces struggled under the force of blitzkrieg tactics. During this crisis, de Gaulle finally got his chance. On May 17, near Mont Cornet, he led an armored counterattack. It was one of the few French offensive actions during the campaign. His tanks inflicted heavy enemy losses and pushed them back temporarily. Although it did not change the overall outcome, his bold move sharply contrasted with the hesitation seen elsewhere in the French military, attracting attention from national leaders. Just 3 days later, Prime Minister Paul Reynaud promoted de Gaulle to brigadier general, a rare wartime promotion. At 49, he became one of the youngest generals in France. However, promotion did not stop disaster. By June, German forces reached Paris, and the French army was collapsing. De Gaulle was appointed Under Secretary for National Defense, where he strongly argued against surrender. He insisted France must continue fighting, even from overseas territories if needed. This placed him in direct opposition to Marshal Pétain, who pushed for an armistice. When Reynaud resigned and Pétain took power, France moved toward peace with Germany. For de Gaulle, this felt like betrayal. On June 17, 1940, he rejected the armistice. The next day, as German control tightened, he left by ship for England. On June 18, 1940, de Gaulle sat before a microphone at the BBC in London. The day before, Pétain had announced France would seek peace. Now, de Gaulle, a little-known general with no army, told the French people the war was not over. Calm but firm, he urged resistance and called on soldiers, engineers, and workers to join him in Britain. He insisted France still had allies, an empire, and a duty to continue fighting. Only a small audience heard the speech at the time, but it later became one of France's most famous broadcasts. His task was enormous. In summer 1940, he had almost nothing: no government, resources, or international recognition. The Vichy regime declared him a traitor and stripped him of rank and citizenship. Yet he remained determined. Gradually, he gathered support. French colonies in equatorial Africa, led from Brazzaville, pledged loyalty. Volunteers came to Britain, forming the foundation of the Free French Forces. De Gaulle worked constantly, visiting troops, issuing commands, and projecting authority greater than his actual resources. He was difficult to work with. His pride and rigidity often frustrated Winston Churchill, who had given him refuge, and irritated Franklin D. Roosevelt, who deeply distrusted him. Still, even critics saw his importance. De Gaulle symbolized the idea that France had not truly surrendered. Over time, Free France strengthened. Resistance groups inside occupied France began seeing him as their symbolic leader. His speeches, secretly carried across the English Channel and passed from person to person, helped restore hope to a defeated nation. Through determination and force of personality, Charles de Gaulle reshaped himself from a little-known officer into the human symbol of French resistance. Establishing his base in London, he proclaimed himself leader of Free France, even while struggling to be recognized as legitimate. At that time, the Vichy regime governed France and its empire, and most foreign nations treated it as the official French authority. Many therefore saw de Gaulle as an unauthorized rebel. His first real challenge arrived in September 1940 in French West Africa, where British and Free French troops tried to capture territory for the Allied side. Local officials stayed loyal to Vichy, the attack failed, and de Gaulle returned in disgrace. Even so, he refused to give up. He intensified efforts to convince other African colonies to join him. By the end of 1940, much of French equatorial Africa had aligned with Free France, giving him a crucial operational base. He then built the Free French Forces, a small but highly motivated army formed from colonial troops, exiled soldiers, and volunteers. He demanded they fight under the French flag rather than serve merely as British support forces, because maintaining France's independence was his highest priority. This attitude often created tension with allies, but his persistence gradually strengthened his position as resistance groups inside occupied France began treating him as their central leader. By 1942, Free France had established itself more firmly. Its forces fought alongside British troops across North Africa, including operations in the deserts of Libya and later in Tunisia. Over time, de Gaulle transformed from an isolated exile into the accepted head of a movement determined to keep France active in the war. By summer 1944, Allied troops were preparing to invade Normandy. De Gaulle feared liberation might leave France controlled by foreign commanders or reduced to a dependent ally. To prevent that, he pressed Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt to acknowledge his authority. On June 6, as Allied forces landed, he announced that France was joining the war on the side of victory and that the Republic would be restored. By August, the liberation of Paris had begun. Resistance fighters rose up as Allied troops approached. De Gaulle insisted French forces lead the entry into the capital. When German troops surrendered on August 25, he marched triumphantly through Paris the next day, symbolizing national rebirth and proving France had helped free itself. He quickly organized a provisional French government, aiming to restore order, prevent revenge violence, and assert national authority in Allied eyes. He resisted plans to place France under Allied military administration, arguing that French citizens must govern themselves. Despite massive destruction and political division, he legalized resistance movements, restored republican systems, and re-established France among the victorious powers. By late 1944, France again functioned as a sovereign state. As provisional leader, he rebuilt institutions, restored legal governance, granted women voting rights, and removed collaborators from positions of power. His goal was a strong state respected abroad and obeyed at home. However, post-war political rivalry frustrated him. Communists, socialists, and Christian Democrats all tried shaping France's future, while de Gaulle pushed for a powerful presidency to avoid the instability that had damaged earlier governments. In 1946, when a constitution emphasizing parliamentary power was introduced, he strongly opposed it, predicting weak leadership and constant division. When ignored, he resigned on January 20, 1946, and withdrew from public life. He retired to the countryside, writing war memoirs while believing he would eventually be needed again. By 1958, France faced crisis, largely because of the war in Algeria. Political instability weakened the Fourth Republic, and many military and political leaders again turned to him. On June 1, 1958, he returned as Prime Minister with exceptional powers. Soon afterward, he designed a new constitution establishing the Fifth Republic, centered on a strong presidency. He then became its first president. As leader, he promoted French global independence, built a nuclear deterrent, and in 1966 removed French forces from the integrated command of NATO while remaining politically aligned with Western nations. The Algerian conflict defined his presidency. Though initially expected to preserve French Algeria, he eventually accepted independence as unavoidable. In 1962, he approved agreements granting Algeria independence, angering settlers and parts of the army and leading to assassination attempts against him. Domestically, he projected an image of distant authority and delivered long, deliberate speeches that reinforced his status as a national figure above party politics. Yet by the late 1960s, public support weakened. Massive protests and strikes in May 1968 revealed deep social tension. Seeking renewed approval, he called a 1969 constitutional referendum. When voters rejected it, he immediately resigned, honoring his promise not to rule without public backing. Retiring again to private life, he lived quietly, writing and receiving visitors. On November 9, 1970, he died from a heart attack at home at age 80. His funeral followed his wishes, simple and without ceremony. Nevertheless, global leaders such as Richard Nixon and Leonid Brezhnev came to honor the man who had opposed Adolf Hitler, restored his country, and defended its global standing. For the French public, his death marked the end of an era. He had become more than a military commander or politician. He symbolized France's endurance, pride, and refusal to collapse. His memorial, marked by the Cross of Lorraine, stands as a reminder of the leader who declared France still lived when defeat seemed certain. His life stretched from the late 19th century into the Cold War era, and through world wars, exile, and triumphant return, he remained defined by resolve, vision, and unwavering resistance.